join me in welcoming Dean Susan Lawrence.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and I want to state very clearly for the record that nothing I'm saying here is SAS policy. These are my reflections, not necessarily antithetical to S, but anyway, okay. This is a wonderful showcase of how-tos, and I think you can see here how seriously OIT takes not just its cookie baking, but how seriously they take education and how eager they are to work with you and see that technology works for you. And indeed, that's the reason for all the gracious hospitality as well. I'm not going to talk about the how-to. You all are doing workshops with that. But rather, I'm going to try to offer some speculations from, say, 20,000 feet about education and technology. And I think my remarks are more suggestive than definitive, more I could say this earlier today, interrogatory than declarative. And if you agree with everything I have to say, then I will have failed today. So, if we mean by technology everything computers, tablets, smartphones can do, and everything that can be shared via the internet, the modern university has clearly embraced technology. We have 6,500 sections with enrollments totaling 190,000 using an online course management system. Sakai and eCollege report a total of 3 million instruction-based connection hours each semester. This is vastly different than when I showed up here in 1985 with an IBM Selectric in my office and my punch cards from my dissertation. And so technology has infused, even the modern sense of technology has infused everything we do. So what does this mean for us? Around the time Gail called me and asked me to speak, I was inspired, well, to tell the truth, really more annoyed by a post on the Inside Higher Ed LinkedIn group I subscribe to. The writer asked, perhaps innocently enough, though it goes right for the jugular, what is education's role when anyone can learn on the internet? And that will be my trope today, that question, what is education's role when anyone can learn on the internet? And I think Ken addressed that this morning as well when he asked if 2013 will be the beginning of the end of the university. There's obviously great opportunity in these questions. There's no doubt that the internet's expansion of information and instruction to the far corners of the globe is a miraculous and marvelous thing for all of us who believe in the intrinsic and the instrumental value of learning. And the just-in-time learning provided by things like Khan Academy is wonderful as well. Although, of course, every technology has its Achilles heel. Or as I've been saying lately, Sandy happens. It was quite a lesson in how reliant we've all become on digital technology, electricity, computers, cell service, connections to the internet when it went down. We were prepared for disasters like snowstorms, H1N1, where we could use technology to maintain continuity in our instruction even when the university was closed. But we were not prepared for days of a crippled grid and crashed servers. And even when Rutgers was back up, the students and the faculty were still down. And it's not just Sandy happens, it's Syria happens. I don't know how many of you saw a couple weeks ago, the whole internet and a substantial portion of cell service in war-torn Syria was down for 48 hours. Now, whether that was by government design or it was a casualty of war, a combat casualty, it's fair warning about relying only on the internet. But of course, we're a long way from relying only on the internet, right? Maybe, maybe not. Okay. So what is education's role when anyone can learn on the internet, at least when the grid's up? It was clear from the context of the post that the writer was asking the question that creates a nauseating pit in some faculty stomachs these days. What happens to our institutions of higher education? Universities, colleges. What happens to our conception of courses, degrees? What happens to faculty, to our roles, to our jobs? And Ken talked about a lot of that this morning. If one keeps up with the Chronicle or Inside Higher Ed or even the New York Times, you can't avoid seeing that in the last year or two, there's been a tsunami of technologically driven disruption in higher education. MOOCs are the latest rage, whether they're Satan or Savior, they are here. There are arguments on both sides. Higher education has been disrupted in ways that will inevitably alter our institutions of education. And of course, all of this is embedded in a complex economic, political, and series of complex economic, political, and social conflicts. And higher ed is in crisis, but not simply because of technology or because faculty have been slow to embrace technology or administrators have been too fast to embrace technology, but in part, I want to argue, because we have become so distracted by the technology itself, we've forgotten what we know and what we've always been about, and we've lost sight of the big picture. The new information technology will of course change education, just as every transformative technology before it has. The agrarian revolution, the printing press, the industrial revolution, but the sky is not falling. Undergraduates are still applying to bricks and mortar campuses in record numbers, and they will continue to do so, if for no other reason than 18-year-olds want somewhere to go. And their parents want their kids not just to get a degree that will lead to a job and economic self-sufficiency, but also want their kids to transition into an adulthood and independence with a safety net and support. And even though we don't hear it as much these days, they do, by and large, want their kids to be well educated. I believe we do ourselves a fundamental disservice when we let ourselves believe that the university's educational value is threatened by an internet that allows anyone to learn anything, anytime. But we cannot ignore that parents and policymakers are increasingly and incessantly asking us to answer the economic version of this question. Why does higher ed cost so much? Wouldn't it be cheaper and easier for everyone to just learn on the internet? Our survival depends, I think, on our ability to answer both the substantive and economic versions of this question in a way that is accessible and persuasive to the many stakeholders in higher ed. We know that what we do is invaluable. We need to be able to communicate that. And I think our survival depends on our own ability to lower our cost. So what is education's role when anyone can learn on the internet? Now, part of why this question annoyed me is there was a part of me that thought, this is ridiculous. It's like asking, what was education's role when anybody could read a book? Did widespread literacy and mass production of books increase or decrease the importance of institutions of higher learning? Okay. Digital technology will continue to play a larger and larger role in our teaching, just as it continues to play a larger and larger role in our lives generally. It need not be an all or nothing proposition. It lets us do really exciting things with our students that we couldn't imagine 10, 15 years ago. But it need not mean that we can't also continue to employ pedagogies that work now. In fact, a number of students would prefer I went back to my chalk. They find the glitches that I sometimes experience in getting the PowerPoint presentation up and running in a particular classroom to be a distraction. And the recent flipped classroom fad sounds to me an awful lot like what we used to call doing your homework before you come to class. Students, young undergraduate students, value face-to-face classroom meetings in subjects they care about. They know they need to build their face-to-face communication skills. And how do I know this? Because they told me. I offered to teach the course online. They said, no, we really need to be in the classroom. For them, online sometimes feels a little bit too much like reading a book instead of taking a course. Now, there's a popular notion out there that today's students are demanding online courses. And sometimes they are. Quite often because online courses give students great flexibility in scheduling. And indeed, this has been seen as the great advantage of online education. And it probably is. Although let me quote from a random site that showed up in my email inbox of a group marketing higher ed online learning. Quoting, owing to the gruesome, hectic routines and work schedules, learners are developing affinities for online education. The online education assists learners to maintain poise between learning responsibilities and other obligations. Online education allows the students to earn knowledge in a flexible and amiable manner. So the online education ameliorates the onus that one bears by pursuing a campus-based education. This is a tremendous advantage for specific populations of students, particularly adult degree completion and professional master's students. But let's take the full-time undergraduate student body, the 18 to 25-year-olds or 24-year-olds. Now, that may seem like a select elitist group when we think about online education, but that is 95% of the Rutgers New Brunswick student body is full-time undergraduate students in the 18 to 24 realm. The patterns we're seeing in advising offices and the review of transcripts of full-time undergraduate students show that the students like flexibility. But they generally select online courses as filler. They don't select online courses in their major or in their areas of interest. They select them to meet a general education requirement that they're annoyed they have to take in the first place, or to get themselves up to a full credit load. Now, this is true of a number of classroom courses too, and it's part of a much bigger trend I want to talk about in a minute, but it's easier to see it with the online courses. Now, I mention this not as an indictment of online education, but I mention it because I think that when we teach online in an area that's not necessarily targeted to majors or students with an overwhelming, compelling interest in the subject before they come in, we need to figure it into our course design. We need to recognize this and construct our courses to encourage learning, despite the fact that we may often see low scores on the student instructional survey question that says, I had a strong prior interest in the subject matter and wanted to take the course. Now, don't mishear me. This is not an indictment of online courses. And it is not true of all students all the time. In particular, I think it's not accurate at the professional graduate level. I think online MA programs and online BA degree completion for adult student programs from established universities have a promising future, at least in the short run, Ken, if not over the next 25 years. And their online degrees, I think, are quite appropriate for these more mature and purposeful students. Rutgers has developed some great ones, and more are in the pipeline. And it's clearly true that the best online courses are always better than the worst classroom courses, and vice versa. And arguably, the best online courses may even be better than the average classroom course. The research to date shows that there's not much difference in student achievement overall based on online versus face-to-face, if one controls for all the other variables. But of course, in the real world, one can't do that. And it's worth remembering what students need to do well online. A comfort with computers and the internet, basic internet skills and the ability to troubleshoot and problem solve IT issues, Now, while these kids live on Facebook and seem to be born knowing how to play Angry Birds, they are not very good problem solvers, troubleshooters with digital technology, okay? At least that's been my experience with them. When it's outside what they're used to, they don't or won't put in some of the extra effort it takes to figure it out. They need a certain comfort in learning with learning in solitude, or with only online interaction with a collection of other users. And they need very effective time management. Now, effective time management is required for all education, classroom courses as well as online courses. But online, I think, requires an even higher degree of helping students manage their time. They don't have the schedule prompts that physical meetings provide, and they must have a self-directed commitment to online learning. And as we multiply the number of students per course, I think these skills are even more essential. Only 5% of students who enroll in MOOCs ever actually complete them. So what is education's role when anyone can learn on the internet? When I think about full-time, traditional age undergraduate education, I recognize that the online course as filler problem is part of a much larger problem that indeed troubles me greatly. As I said, students treat face-to-face courses this way as well when they're not in their major or minor. They see them simply as unnecessary hurdles to their degree, or far too many of them see them this way. The mission of undergraduate education, I think, is increasingly threatened by a growing trend of viewing undergraduate degrees as a series of unrelated credits strung together to meet the university's arbitrary, or at least that's how it seems to the students, set of requirements. If it doesn't result in a credential, a major, a minor, a certificate, or a badge, or if it isn't specifically required, it doesn't count in their mind. And there's no point putting any effort into it, whether it's in a classroom or online. I hear this from their parents as well. The proponents of portable credits, fully online degrees, or badges rather than degrees, I think also suffer from this belief that a college education is simply a set of individual courses strung together to meet a set of degree requirements. Proponents of online education tell us that online education ameliorates the onus that one bears while pursuing a campus-based education. That I would argue it's precisely that onus that's an important part of a college education. It's an important part of the value of a college education culminating in a degree. The a la carte, on-the-run view misses the much larger transformative learning experience that the campus-based, residential, semi-residential, full-time college provides as students mature into adulthood. Part of the full-time undergraduate educational and learning experience is accomplished by the full immersion experience with the time for repose, reflection, and separation from the regular routine of work and family. The opportunity to encounter the great minds of the ages, grapple with enduring questions, think critically about your values and your beliefs is not something to be squeezed in between gruesome, hectic routines and work schedules. Maybe this seems like too idealistic and naive and elitist view of undergraduate education, but I thought it was our mission. This larger transformative experience makes important contributions to the graduate's career and life readiness, but it's hard to replicate it through a series of isolated a la carte online courses or isolated a la carte courses collected from AP credits, community college, Rutgers, whatever other school they tried for a few months. It's not a problem simply that comes with online, but it has been, I think, exacerbated by it. Online degrees are wonderful for reaching older and non-traditional students for whom the full immersion experience is impossible, but they're less successful with students who have not yet matured into autodidacticism. So you can learn anything on the internet anytime, but I'm not sure that's the same thing as getting an education. So I'm not yet worried that the internet, online education, and MOOCs are going to make universities extinct. But that doesn't mean we should ignore online learning. It's here, it's not going away, and it's a good thing. Indeed, I think we have a duty to provide students with top-notch online courses and develop their ability to learn online. Autodidactic online learning will be an essential medium for lifelong learning, which is going to be more important for this generation than any previous generation. Online courses should be part of the mix of what students do as they move towards their degree, and every course should make a pedagogically appropriate use of technology. And I do think we're on an impossible mission if we continue to try to ban technology from the classroom. Rather, we need to invest in figuring out how to achieve our educational mission with a student body who is plugged in 24/7. But none of this really gets at, none of this is as important as the fundamental, but I think unintended, challenge implicit in the question, what is education's role when anyone can learn on the internet? And that challenge is, what education? What education do students need in a world transformed by the technology that allows anyone to learn on the internet, and so much more? We are living through what are probably just the early years of a paradigm-shifting information technology revolution. It will revolutionize the university, but it will revolutionize every other part of the world. It's transforming our conception of time, space, identity, boundaries, privacy, ownership, and authority. Our ability to create, manipulate, computate, navigate, and communicate phenomenally large amounts of data is revolutionizing and redefining our economy, science and medicine, and our social and political interactions. The technology itself requires an ever-updated set of user skills, and in terms of particular bodies of information, what our students need to know is changing so rapidly we can't possibly hope to keep up with it. Particularly if we're interested in doing something more than preparing them for a job the minute they walk off that graduation stage. But if we're interested in them having a successful life and career for the next 50 years, 60 years, 70 years. The life should go on, but maybe the career only goes for 50 years, or 40. Perhaps most importantly, the more technology advances our ability to manipulate the world around and within us, the more imperative it becomes that we make wise and considered choices. That's what education is for, not just the acquisition of the latest information. It's easy and fun to get wrapped up in all the neat technologies on display here. But as we do that, let's keep a firm focus on thinking first and foremost about what our students need to know. Education is about more than learning information. What is education's role when anyone can learn on the internet? What will today's students need to manage the future? What will equip them to flourish in this revolutionary age? What will they need for a lifetime of continuous learning and adapting the 21st century requires? That's what we, as the university community, are best suited to answer. The web may be the information storehouse, but we are the living embodiment of the knowledge and wisdom of the ages, of human civilization, of each generation standing on the shoulders of the previous. Collectively, we know quite a bit about how societies, cultures and subcultures, governments and individuals have dealt with transformative technological change in the past. And I think it's our role to figure out how to equip our students to live through this tremendous change. Based on what we know our students will need, for example, a mooring, an understanding of the broad sweep of history as an anchoring heuristic as they live through a time of unprecedented and rapidity of change. They'll need the perspective that comes from a sense of how others have managed change and defined value for themselves. They will need an understanding of their own place, identity, and boundaries in the broader communities in which they live, geographic, cultural, virtual. They will need an understanding of themselves and their values and those of others, both similar and different in every possible dimension as we get to a flatter and flatter Earth. They will need the capacity to engage in moral and ethical reasoning, in decision-making across realms, including those stemming from the advances in technology and science. They'll need the ability to think critically about information and assess its reliability and usefulness in problem solving. They will need the lifelong learning skills to keep up with the advances in technologies and growing information bases. And they'll need the context to keep it all in perspective as the ground continually shifts under their feet. And the institutions they relied on yesterday or today are being transformed by tomorrow's discovery. So as we celebrate the information bonanza technology has brought us and our ability to engage students in all these new and exciting ways and to reach whole new groups of students effectively shut out of learning and degree credentialing previously, let's think hard about not just how we are teaching, but let's think about what students need to know. What are the competencies they will need? What combination of information, skill, and understanding of what, when, how, and why do they need for the 21st century technological revolution they're living through? In that, I think, lies the answer to what is the university's role when anyone can learn on the internet. It is the university that can adapt to that role that will survive and flourish in the new age. Thank you. I think that it's one of the excellent ways of preparing students for this coming revolution and the lifelong learning through online education, because that's how they're going to get a lot of their professional master's degrees or specific job training on the job, and it's just going to get more and more and more that way. And I didn't mean to suggest it's all or nothing. There is a crowd out there that wants to talk about fully online degrees. And I think that a lot of the flaws in the current thinking is kind of an either-or perspective instead of thinking about this is going to fundamentally change everything we do. It already has, okay? Maybe not our purposes and our goals, but the way we do it, the way we submit grades, the way we get our rosters, you know, it's to go from the pedestrian. So we need to quit treating it quite so much like the new toy and just accept it that this is one of the many tools that we can achieve our pedagogical mission. You know, there's 1,000 responses, right? The easy, cheap one is, well, not all the faculty step up to the plate doing that here on campus, right? You know, but that's not an excuse for it. I think it depends on how we approach online education. Do we approach it as a way to expand our reach, a way to better accomplish our missions and reach whole new audiences? Or are we overwhelmed by just worrying about cost efficiencies? We have to pay our bills. You know, we're a nonprofit, but we're not, you know, we have to meet our cost, right? So we have to figure that part out somehow. And higher education is not a Rutgers problem, it's a higher education problem across the country, particularly public universities. State budgets have been cut, and every university, state or not, is looking to fill their revenue gaps with undergraduate tuition. And they see online as a relatively easy way to do that, because you don't have to have classrooms, blah, blah, blah. It begs the question of who's teaching these courses, under what kind of supervision and whatnot, and there are a lot of models that can be imagined. There is, you know, you go down to the train tracks, the train station, and pull somebody off the platform and say, here's the, you're going to be a PTL, which 15 years ago, some days that felt like that's what I was doing, trying to cover political science courses in the classroom at the last minute, you know, as we're going, calling, oh God, does NYU have any graduate students that can come teach this IR course, blah, blah, blah. Or another model is, you know, we can take our very best researchers, our very best faculty, world-renowned people, and give people around the world access to them virtually, online, if they're interested in doing that. So there are value decisions and mission decisions to be made in all these. They're not purely economic decisions. I'm not sure if there ever is anything that's completely an economic decision that doesn't also have value dimensions, but. I've got, you know, right here, more information than any research library in the world, any faculty, all the, you know, it's all here. Now, the best place to hide stuff is in plain sight, right? So I don't, the wisdom and the good stuff might get lost in that sea of stuff. But it's not our role anymore to be the monks transcribing the sacred documents that must be saved, or to be the few literate members of society, or even the deciders of what is culture. But, so what is our role? I mean, and they're right. Much of what we teach content-wise, they don't need to know. But they need to know the critical thinking skills that we're teaching by teaching that. And who knows you don't need to know it? Can you really say that? How do you know what you're going to need to know? What's going to come in handy? What's going to be useful if you want to be just completely instrumental about it? To know what's going to be a good metaphor or analogy when you're making a business presentation 20 years from now? What's going to be your boss's pet interests that you're going to, you know, there are illusions. If you stop and listen to yourself, you're making allusions all the time to things that are just part of having a liberal arts education and a certain cultural knowledge. And I know that that can come as elitist or whatnot, but it's only elitist if you have an elitist definition of what that cultural knowledge is. But so I think we have a lot of things to think through. And we have to do, I really believe we have to do a much better job of communicating this to the students, to the parents, to the taxpayers who are asking hard questions about why am I spending all this money? And they would rather have a serious answer than hear me say, but the average student loan debt is $26,000 and the average amount people spend on weddings is $27,000 plus a $5,000 honeymoon, and 50% of those don't last, okay? $26,000, how much did you pay for your last car? You know, they don't want to hear that. They want to understand, why is this costing me so much? But I think the analogy to, you know, well, why do you need to go to school? You can read a book. Right, and you know, some people can be Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and whoever founded PayPal and is trying to encourage ignorance and whatnot. But most of us aren't going to be.